All Things Unexplained. Hosted by Dr. Mounts.
Let's face it, we were always ready to roll without him anyway.
CJ Derringer.
Ain't nobody perfect, right?
And Smitty Neebs.
I've never planned out hardly anything my whole life. I just freeball.
Featuring Cajun Man.
I'm just old nobody, somebody looking for somebody.
Previously on All Things Unexplained.
The US government is talking about objects they do not identify. The head of the new office in government that was established by Congress a year ago, and this office has been operating and delivered a report to Congress just recently. We haven't seen it yet. He visited my home a month ago, and
really,
yeah, and we had a conversation. Of course, I'm not interested in any classified information, and probably the most juicy information is classified. Because the unclassified information is not really convincing. These are fuzzy images. We saw some of them, but the point of the matter is, we shouldn't ask the government to declassify it. We shouldn't wait for them to declassify. We should just look at the sky ourselves, and that was the rationale for the Galileo project that I established a year ago, and
yes,
we're making progress. Actually, this week, the suite of instruments that we assembled this week is starting to collect data. And we will start analyzing it with artificial intelligence algorithms. And once everything works, hopefully through December, we'll start planning for a copy of this system to be placed in a desired location and start getting data in places where reports came either from the government or from citizens. And I see that as the only path forward. It's what common sense asks. If the government cannot identify things, let's help them. It's our civil duty. And I really don't care what people say on Twitter about it.
Well, that's good. I mean, I'm sitting here going, okay, you had somebody in your home that has classified information about unidentified aerial phenomena. Tim and I watched that Congress session where they were going to talk about some of these things, and we're sitting on pins and needles, and they kept saying, I think we'll save that for closed session. And we were like, no, tell us more. I just don't, how you could have them in your house.
So some of that, I think, sir, we'll save for closed session.
I should say that during the pandemic, I had very interesting visitors. I had dozens of very distinguished people that came, some of which are multi-billionaires, and they were all hosted in my porch, and because it was during the pandemic, I found that to be quite exciting. Now, the other thing that happened during the pandemic, since my book appeared, I was on about 1,800 interviews, and most of them taken from my home office. So I'm just coming out to the world now. And over the past 2 weeks, for example, I was in Vegas, as I mentioned, and for the International Women's Forum, and after that the podcast, and in LA the following day, and then this weekend I was in a summit in Palm Desert, and after that the public lecture. And so in all of these events, young people approach me and say, can we have a selfie with you? And I find that surprising, because they basically know. And so there was a young woman that came over just a few days ago, came to me at dinner and said, could I have a selfie with you? I said, okay, no problem. And I said that I admire what is happening now in the protest by the women in Iran. That's very courageous what they're doing. And so she put it on Instagram, this selfie. And then the following morning, she told me, you know that you have hundreds of women scientists in Iran that are following your work and are admiring what you're doing. And I said, no, I had no idea. So I basically recorded a video for her in which I made a public statement about my support for the women of Iran. And Altogether, I find it surprising that people know about me because it seems like people are following it. I was at home most of the pandemic.
Yes. Well, it's charming that you don't know how popular you are because you are very popular. Just one quick search on the internet and it's like never-ending information about yourself. So that's impressive. But one thing that Tim and I discussed is you seem very connected to, or at the very least sought out by people who have these positions of power that are looking into UAPs. You recently were in DC with the pilot, I believe, and astronaut Scott Kelly, and clearly they all believe that you know something, or at least have the intelligence to get them closer to what they want to know. Can you tell us a little bit more about your meeting in DC that you had recently?
Yeah, so I never manipulate people. I was chair of the astronomy department at Harvard for 9 years, and the only reason that I was the longest serving chair is because people believed everything I say. What you see is what you get, and nobody suspects me as a political figure that tries to manipulate people. Okay, so in a way that helps a lot because you have the trust of people. And so I went to DC to present in the first meeting of this study that NASA established, because actually a year earlier I wrote to NASA and suggested such a study as soon as I heard Bill Nelson, after the report was delivered to Congress, that back in June 2021, that he said that scientists should get engaged and help the government. And I said, I'm happy to make you happy, basically, to Bill. And then I attended the forum in the Washington National Cathedral where Bill Nelson was, and Avril Haines, she was sitting next to me, the director of national intelligence, and Jeff Bezos. And at some point, Jeff Bezos was talking about going to, bringing people to space with Blue Origin, and saying that he was inspired to establish this space company as a result of watching Star Trek as a kid. And I whispered to Avril, and I said, I was never impressed by Star Trek because the storyline violates the laws of physics, so I cannot really enjoy that. And she said, we have to work on you, Avi. And so that was so basically what I told the NASA study is, what we are planning to do with the Galileo project, which is to collect data and make it open and report about it in scientific publications. And I described the instruments that we'll be using. And this study is supposed to report back in June 2023 to NASA headquarters and basically advise NASA whether how much money and to invest in this line of research and what to do with it. And the point is the Galileo project is already doing that. Okay, so it's not as if we depend on them. It's a good thing that NASA shows interest. I salute that. But it will take them at least 2 years before the money is delivered to research groups. And so we are already doing it based on private funding. And so I'm happy that it's happening, but it doesn't in any way postpone the research until the decision is made by the study, because we're already doing it.
Yeah, that's one of the perplexing things that we've found about the NASA study is their disclosure that we're spending $100,000 on this, and that just seemed like a very minuscule drop in the bucket. Like, what are they possibly hoping to accomplish with just $100,000, or are we missing something there?
Yeah, I mean, the study was just of it's a committee that is supposed to recommend. It's not a committee that is doing any research, and they will be studying only the unclassified information, which, as I said, is much less impressive probably than the classified portion. And I say that without seeing it. I say that because high-level officials who saw the classified data said that it's quite intriguing. In fact, Bill Nelson said that the hair in the back of his neck stood up when he saw it.
What?
I don't know what that means. I've never, to figure out what it means, I need to see when does the hair on the back of Bill Nelson stands up by showing him different videos. So I don't know what to make of it. But there were others, there were presidents and other high-level officials that talked about it. And it sounds to me like that there is very intriguing data, but the government is not a scientific organization. So
Right.
we cannot ask them to do the scientific research for us. We cannot ask them to declassify data because it will reveal the nature of classified sensors that the government is using, and that will compromise national security interests, right? So these sensors are used to defend the US, and we don't want adversaries to be aware of their quality. So obviously, they will not release the data, even if the sky is not classified. We can look at objects. So we need to do the work ourselves rather than, sitting back, relaxing, and saying, let's wait until the government will give us all the information. I don't want them to give us the classified data because it will compromise national security interests. I just want to get the data with unclassified sensors, which make a lot of sense. And because the sky is not classified, the sky is something astronomers are studying all the time.
Well, let me ask you really quickly. If they approached you and said, Avi, we need a scientist to come and work for us and take a look at this classified information, would you do it?
I would look at any information that advances our knowledge. Now, because I want to find the answer, you see. I don't want to compromise national security interests of the US. But if there is something out there, and it's already evident in some existing data, we should be able to see it again, okay, with unclassified. Like we should be able to see it with instruments that are not classified, and then it will be open data. So the question is, what is out there? And we just started with the Galileo project, so I don't know the answer. I would be, I'm very curious to know what's out there. And if the government already knows, that would be amazing. Now, I should say that the person who visited me said, I have an obligation that if I see something, of extraterrestrial origin, I will have to report to the US president.
Wow.
Well, imagine if you discover that the universe is made mostly of hydrogen. Suppose you were the one to discover that, which was actually the first person who did the PhD in astronomy at Harvard. Her name was Cecilia Payne-Kopashkin. She realized that the sun is made mostly of hydrogen. She was the first, okay? And of course, the experts at the time, and among them was Henry Norris Russell, the director of the Princeton University Observatory, who was a member of her thesis committee back 100 years ago. He said, take it out from your thesis. This makes no sense. We know that the sun is made of the same material as the earth. It's made of iron. It's made of heavy elements. And she took it out. And then after 4 years of him investing time in the research, he realized that she was right, that indeed the sun is made of hydrogen. We now know the universe is made mostly of hydrogen in terms of ordinary matter, okay? And my point is, suppose you were, you are at the White House at the time, and Cecilia Payne-Kopashkin tells you, the universe is made of hydrogen. Would you go to the president and tell the president, look, at the time, we have some confidential information that the universe is made of hydrogen, and you are the first to know that? That would mean nothing, because it's not a matter that relates to the interests of the United States. It's scientific knowledge, which is of interest to the entirety of humanity, to all human beings, okay? That's what science is about. It's about the big picture, okay? And the knowledge that we acquire by science should be shared by all humans. So it makes very little sense. Suppose there are extraterrestrials. Does it make any sense for the president to be the first one to know about it and the only one? To me, it makes very little sense, because it's the reality that we live in. The same as the earth moves around the sun. Okay, the president will be the first to know that the earth moves around the sun. So what? Eventually people will figure it out. Everyone will know about it. It has nothing to do with national security. I would better let everyone know about it so that we can then adapt to that reality. Okay. Now there is a question of how, people might react in ways that are not, it will destabilize stabilize society in some.
Right.
Okay, but that's a different consideration. But it doesn't mean so then you can have a team of people who can design how to deliver the message. That's a different matter. But it should not be kept secret so that at first, so that only the president knows about it, because it has to do with scientific knowledge. Okay, scientific knowledge should not be restricted. That's my fundamental point.
Right.
I mean, unless you're using.
But do you think the government feels the same way?
I don't know, but I'm talking as a scientist, not as a government employee right now.
Yeah.
And so,
Yeah.
we should see. But my point is that science discovers knowledge that should be shared by all humans. And that was my message, that we should all, humanity as a whole, benefits from science. Science is an infinite sum game. We are used to zero sum game, where if someone benefits, others lose. That's the whole idea in politics, that you have groups of people fighting for limited resources. For example, in an election, there is a certain number of voters, and you fight for, if you get more votes, the other side gets less. That's a zero-sum game, okay? But science is an infinite sum game, in the sense that if one group discovers something, everyone benefits. And it's not as if it's a limited resource of knowledge. Knowledge could be right now the knowledge is an island in an ocean of ignorance. So if we expand the landmass of the island, having more knowledge, everyone would benefit from it. It's an infinite sum game. Everyone wins by science making discoveries. And that's why, if we find that we are not alone, everyone should know about it ultimately. Now, you can decide about how to deliver the message. That's a relevant consideration in order to avoid the societal instabilities or people behaving in crazy ways. But that's just this is just it's similar to how to deliver a speech. That there are people who know what is that's their craft, how to formulate things such that it will appeal to the public. So that is definitely a consideration, but it should not, the information should not be blocked. That's my point about things that are scientific, unless you're trying to use them for your benefit, scientific of national security. Like if you want to develop some weapon that others will not. But we are not talking about that here. We are talking about knowing whether we are alone, which I don't think we can use for the benefit of one nation or another. If you for the same reason that one colony of ants noticing a biker will not benefit from the biker passing by relative to another colony of ants on the same sidewalk. So anyway, that's my general message. Is science, the main message of science is let's work together. The main message of politics is to separate groups of people from each other. That's also the main message of social media. The algorithms of social media create polarization, and we are too much. We are affected too much by those dividing forces, and I think it would be much. I mean, basically, if we were to continue the path of separating groups from each other, we will be downgraded in the class of intelligent civilizations in the Milky Way galaxy. We will not be considered intelligent. The sign of intelligence is to work together.
Right. And we're speaking with astrophysicist Avi Loeb, and I'm glad we went down this path about the scientific community, because recently on this show, we attempted to do a deep dive into what appeared to be an explosive scientific paper by a team of Ukrainian astronomers. And, we really tried to dig into it and see, did this make any sense? What was going on here? And shortly after we put that podcast out, we saw that you had a response to their study. And I told CJ, we were actually at our daughter's soccer practice, I said, you know what, we should try to get Avi Loeb on the show and see if he could tell us, because we really tried to dig into that. If what they were saying had merit, I mean, it was potentially one of the most explosive, giant leaps of scientific discovery in human history, is the way I looked at it. So tell us what you saw when you looked at what appeared to be a Ukrainian astronomical study on UAPs?
So right, the purpose of science is to increase the signal to noise ratio, basically reduce as much as possible the level of noise so that you can see the signal sticking out. Okay, that's what most experiments aim at, and that's why I was reluctant to even read the Ukrainian report, because there is a lot of noise in a war zone. Okay, that's the last place on earth where I would put my instruments, because there are all kinds of secretive drones and all kinds of equipment flying around. And anyway, after the visit of this person from government that I mentioned before, he urged me to think about writing a scientific paper about UAP. And I looked at the Ukrainian report the following morning, and what they claimed was to see two types of objects, bright objects and dark objects. And the dark objects, they said, are detected at a distance of about 10 kilometers, and they move at speeds that exceed the escape speed from the Earth, up to 15 kilometers per second. Okay, and they said these are 10 meter in size. And I immediately calculated that they would create a huge fireball if they were to interact with the air, like any object moving through the air. And the point is, they were claiming that they are dark. Okay, so clearly no fireball. So in order for them to be dark relative to the brightness of the air, they have to block light, electromagnetic radiation. And my point is, if they interact with electromagnetic fields blocking light, they should also interact with electrons in the atmosphere that produce electric and magnetic fields. So they cannot just block light and cannot block the particles of air. So my point is, they must interact with the air if they are dark relative to this, and therefore they must create a fireball. Now I said, okay, so what went wrong? It turns out that they didn't measure the distances in a reliable way. The best way to measure distances is by triangulation. If you measure the position of the object in the sky from different directions, just like we have two eyes so that we can estimate distances. All the animals, all the humans that had one eye did not survive, because when a tiger would come close to them, they would think the tiger is far away. And only those with two eyes could tell the distance of the tiger and manage to escape. So that's why we have two eyes, the survival of the fittest. So anyway, so the way to tell distance is to watch an object from different directions. They did not do that. They had one side observations of the dark objects, and they estimated distance indirectly. And I argued, okay, maybe they got it wrong. The distance is 10 times closer. So instead of 10 kilometers, it's 1 kilometer. And then you end up with a speed of 1.5 kilometers per second with a size of an object of 1 meter. And that turns out to be the parameters of artillery shells. So I said, they would not produce a fireball. These are artillery shells, or they could even be closer and be bullets, or even closer and be something smaller. So my point was that their distance estimate is incorrect. And I just wrote a quick paper about it. And until they demonstrate they measure distances correctly, we should not pay attention. And it turns out the Academy of Sciences of Ukraine released around the same time a statement saying that they don't believe the distance calculations of this paper. Okay, so it was never internally reviewed. And so the thing that really surprised me was, as soon as my paper came out, those believers on UAP immediately started to attack me, because they said, well, this looks just like the Nimitz incident 20 years earlier. And I say, that's irrelevant. These people are, the only way to answer my criticism is by telling me why the distances are correct. Okay, that's the only way. You can't make analogies between an event occurring now and an event that occurred 20 years ago, because it's a different place and a different environment. This is a war zone. The Nimitz was not a war zone. So in order to eliminate all the possible objects that are flying around, such as drones, artillery shells, bullets, in order to eliminate them from being possible contributors to what these people reported, you have to tell me why the distance estimate is correct. And that's the only way to, but it showed showed to me that, by trying to maintain common sense, I get attacked from both directions. About Oumuamua, I get attacked by the mainstream of scientists.
Right.
And about the Ukrainian report, I get attacked by those believers that are not really paying attention to scientific details. And that shows to me why it's so difficult to maintain common sense in the current environment, like that is very polarized on any subject. But I don't care about both extremes. I think, we should follow the scientific method and figure it out.
Right. And, I think it's just like you say in your book, Extraterrestrial, you say science at its core demands humility, and that the proper response to this is wonder and following the data. So I think it's very much like that. You're just following the data, and I think it's okay to pursue something, but you have to be humble and see that you could be wrong.
Right, which is pretty much the approach of a kid. That's the way kids learn,
Right.
and sometimes they make mistakes. They
Right.
bump into objects, they get bruised. So you have to be ready for making mistakes. But the point is, if you think you know the answer in advance, for example, a colleague of mine, after a lecture about Oumuamua, when we left the room, he said, "Oumuamua is so weird. I wish it never existed." And it shows that experts would much rather, see everything conform with their past knowledge. And when there is something unusual showing up, they refuse to consider possibilities. And that's really unfortunate, because science should be fun. It should be discovering new things. And that, in my childhood, I remember very vividly being at the dinner table and the adults in the room arguing about things, and then I would ask about a difficult question, and they dismissed the question because they didn't know the answer to it. And I hated that feeling, and that's pretty much what guides me. I hate the feeling of people pretending that they know more than they actually know.
Well, then you came to the right spot, because we don't pretend to know anything.
I wrote an essay a week ago saying that the biggest privilege of being a scientist is that when you are asked a question, you are allowed to say, "I don't know." That's your privilege. If you don't know, you don't need to pretend anything. You can just say, "I don't know." And that is not a privilege that is available to politicians. Politicians have to pretend that they know the answer, even if they don't know. And that's the only way for them to keep their followers believing what they say.
Right.
And so being a politician is really, I would say, a not so pleasant task, because you have to pretend. It's all about how you look.
No.
Whereas being a scientist, you can just be straightforward. That's great. It's like wearing a t-shirt instead of being in a suit all day.
And I'm glad you brought that up again.
Yeah.
We're speaking with astrophysicist Avi Loeb. I love how you do thought experiments with your classes. I always loved how I would read about Albert Einstein's thought experiments to figure things out. And listening to you today and reading your book and reading about all the barriers that we have to scientific progress, be it through the popularity, of our topic, determining whether it gets funding or not, students chasing things that there's no evidence for, such as the multiverse. There's only evidence for that, in Marvel and DC, pretty much. Social media, determining what we're going to research based on how many likes it gets on Facebook and Twitter. There's all these barriers to scientific progress and to us reaching out to the stars and finding alien civilizations. So it made me have my own thought experiment, because you talked about, if we have the ability to send out satellites and probes, etc., then there's a great chance that other alien civilizations have reached that point as well. Well, we have all these barriers to scientific accomplishment. I wondered if alien civilizations face the same barriers that we do. Are extraterrestrials having to worry about funding and politicians and social media, or have they progressed somehow beyond that? Can they just, reach out into any scientific endeavor they want to with no worries whatsoever?
Well, that's an excellent question. And what I would rely on is statistics. If there are billions of examples of things like the life that we find here on Earth, then probably there are many possible outcomes, many possible realizations of what the technological civilization looks like. And it could be quite different than what we have here. And that's why, we should hope to see the smartest kid in that class. I mean, there are many students, and, to my students at Harvard, when on the first day of class, I usually say that half of you, such that half of the class is below it for every class. But the students at Harvard, they all think that they're the smartest, so they find it very depressing to hear that. But my point is there must be a large distribution of possible histories that was realized, because the dice was rolled billions of times. And so, and maybe on a given planet, it was rolled multiple times. We don't have evidence that there was an intelligent civilization before us on Earth, but on other planets, it may have come and gone, and so the point is that everything was realized, but we should seek the most intelligent student. And it's very likely that the most intelligent is the one that survived the longest, and that sent the most number of probes that were self-replicating. So by now they populate everywhere. You can have self-replicating probes by having 3D printers that once it lands on a planet, it reproduces copies of itself. And in that way, you can exponentiate the population. And it's sort of like biological creatures that multiply over time. And that could be the reality that we live in. But then you will be dominated by the most successful student in the class. And I think that's the most interesting one to learn from, rather than those classes, all those students below the median. And we might be somewhere in the middle. So that's why we can learn a lot by studying it. And that's why a sense of humility is in place. We shouldn't assume, because, the cosmic play started 13.8 billion years ago. And we just arrived at the end in the last few million years. And we are not at the center of the stage. So clearly the play is not about us. And the only way to find out what it's about is to find other actors who have been around for longer. And these are all general principles that teach us humility, that basically say, let's learn from nature. Nature is our teacher, by looking up, by investing in the search for interstellar objects that may look unusual, search of unidentified objects near Earth. Let's just figure out what they are. If all of them turn out to be natural objects like birds, insects, or human-made objects like drones, airplanes, satellites, so be it. But we need to look before we make a judgment. Whereas until recently, it was all about making a judgment and ridiculing the subject. And I just think it's inappropriate given the importance of this question.
Right. And, I find this something very frustrating, and that is there seems to be this source of disinformation coming from somewhere. Recently in the New York Times, they had an anonymous source quoted as saying, well, these Pentagon sightings, the report, it's mostly going to be Chinese drones, and it's mostly going to be space junk and weather balloons. We've been hearing about weather balloons since Roswell, New Mexico.
Yeah, but they are missing an important point. Okay, it may well be a mixed bag, and I don't care if it's 50% Chinese, 20%, Russian, whatever. The point is, even if there is one object, just one out of hundreds, which happens to be extraterrestrial in origin, that's what we are trying to find. Okay, and that would make a huge impact on the future of humanity. So it's not about all of them. It's not about most of them. It's not even about 10% of them. It's about one object. And unless we check all the objects and verify there is nothing, out of hundreds of cases, we should keep looking. And that's the point they're missing. So just, it's just like going to the beach. Most of the time you find rocks and seashells that are naturally produced, but every now and then you see a plastic bottle. So you might say, okay, I go to the beach and I see all these rocks, therefore there is nothing out there. I say, no, just walk another mile If you see a
Mm,
plastic bottle, you know that there is a civilization out there. So we
yeah.
should keep searching. And once you see one plastic bottle, that's enough. I mean, I don't care how many rocks you've seen along the way.
Yeah. That is such a great point that you make. But I do believe that the government is starting to believe or has believed and is just now sort of disseminating that information. But this person that came to your house, are they on the UAP task force for the government?
No, that person is the head of that.
Is the head of the UAP task force.
Yes.
And they have and they have asked you to do a report on UAPs.
So some of that, I think, sir, we'll save for closed session.
I mean, I can connect the dots.
No, we were just we had a we had a casual conversation, and he just said that it would be nice to write a scientific paper on the subject. And then I looked at the Ukrainian report and I wrote about that. But it's not as if he asked me to do something specifically, but it was a very pleasant conversation, I must say.
Yeah, I imagine.
And I just talked about what the plans are for the Galileo project, and but as I said, there are lots of people that come to me and speak with me, and some of these have to do with the media. That just over the past week I got 2 requests from major journals to do a profile and so forth. And also there is a documentary that was approved for production, and so but all of this is sort of in the background, and what really matters is the data that we will collect. That's really what's most important. Just an anecdote that at some point someone tweeted that he said, my wife has a new crush on a scientist called Avi Loeb that she watched on television. She thinks that he's much sexier than Anthony Fauci. And so I immediately reported to my wife. I immediately reported to her, and she said, Fauci is a low bar.
Oh my gosh, I like your wife.
Your wife's gonna put you in quarantine if you're not careful.
You've been listening to All Things Unexplained. If you liked this podcast, please do give us a 5-star rating and leave us a review. If you would like to hear more All Things Unexplained, be sure to follow us wherever you listen to your podcasts. Our show depends on the support of listeners like you. Find us on Venmo under the business accounts at Bigfoot UFO. If you can't get enough of us, please check us out at allthings-unexplained.com. A special thanks to our producer, director, sound mixer, editor, and the man who wears far too many hats. No, seriously, he wears a lot of hats, Dr. Tim Mounts. Without you, we couldn't keep the lights on. Thanks for listening to All Things Unexplained.